My name is Christian Skau, and I'm interviewing Martin Raussen at the Aalborg University. This is in connection with the 28th Nordic
The 29th,
Congress.
in fact. The 29th, in fact. It doesn't matter.
29th Nordic Congress of Mathematicians, which is now here at the University of Aalborg. And
Right.
you, Martin, you are retiring after
so.
this conference is over. Could you tell us a little about your involvement with these Nordic conferences at large?
I'll try to do that, but before, let me thank you for coming at this special occasion. I'm very grateful that you took the efforts to come here from Trondheim in the first place, and then Oslo, where the two of us for several years have interviewed the Abel Prize recipients. And just to set the stage before I answer your questions, I mean, interviewing the Abel Prize recipients was, in a metaphor, it was something like interviewing or having the Champions League's finalists or even the Champions League winners there. And I'm not at all in that league. I mean, I would have difficulties to qualify for the Conference League. So I'm very honored to have this opportunity to be interviewed. Now, coming to this Congress, well, I would say, I've started to work on getting the Congress to Aalborg already 5 years ago, but for a long time, I mean, something happened and you had to organize things and stuff. But it got then really, I mean, not constant, but work all the time, more or less all the time. For a year ago, since last year, and the last month has been quite busy. I have to admit that. But now we are happy that we will have around 400 participants. We will have 8 plenary talks at the House of Music, and we will have 29 sessions in a university building very close to that. The only thing that could be better, in my view, is the weather that has deteriorated quite a lot lately. So I'm very much looking forward to the Congress and to the opening tomorrow morning.
Very good. Let's now talk a little about you as a mathematician. So the first question I would like to ask you, what kindled your interest and fascination with mathematics in the first place?
Well, that's I can't put my eyes on a very specific instance, but let me start with admitting that my father, in fact, my late father, was a high school teacher in mathematics and physics. And it's clear, I mean, he was also, he was very interested in the subject, and talked with me and also with my brothers and sisters about mathematical topics, and tried to give us small challenges from time to time. And I remember already, the first thing I really remember is when I was still a small kid, maybe just started at school or second or third degree, I don't know exactly, when he asked me in a concrete setting a question that was, you would say, 2 linear equations in 2 variables. And of course I had no clue about how to tackle this problem, but the numbers were not that large, so I could just experiment that in my head and found the answer after a while. I was proud of it, and he was somehow also, he showed me that, I mean, that was somehow exceptional for a kid at that age. And the second instance that still is in my memory, probably many other things are around, is I was older, I mean, it was maybe 11, 12 years old, that I don't know. And somehow I had heard about the test that you can test whether a number is divisible by 3 or by 9 by just taking, I think it's the cross sum, right, in English. Yeah. And well, when I heard about that, I started to think about how about other division tests of that side. Of course, I mean, for example, by 7, I would never have been able to find out about it. But then just by experimenting just with 2 or 3 digit numbers, and those were the numbers that were in my mind at that time, I somehow found out, well, with 11, it's the alternate sum that somehow does the job. Probably I just did it for three-digit numbers or something like that. But it got me really excited. And I remember I wrote a small note about it and distributed it to some of my friends in the class. They were not really interested about it, but it's still in my mind. It was a first of sort of success.
Very good.
In that sense.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. That's nice. A natural follow-up question to what you've been talking about now. When did you really discover that you had a talent, really special talent for mathematics?
Yeah, I mean, talent and interest somehow they are two.
They overlap.
They are very much related to it.
Yeah.
So a little bit older. I mean, in particular, still I would say under the influence of my father, who at that time also got interested in Boolean algebras and this thing. I mean, the very first days of having mathematics and computers, very first computer science, coming up. He led a small workshop on Boolean algebras, and I participated. And I got the impression, which is certainly wrong, as soon as you have something that you can formulate in terms of Boolean algebras, then the computer can work for you. And then I started to look at what happens when you take the operations, what is the greatest common divisor and the smallest common multiple and so on. Take that, and that works well in this respect as soon as you take a number that is a product of different primes at the power 1, so to speak. And in other cases it doesn't work. I mean, by now I would say for obvious reasons, because I mean, when you look at the divisors, they are, in one case it's just the powers that they are looking at. In the other case it's something that's more complicated.
Yes.
But that was something that I looked upon and also wrote a small note and even tried to get it published in a small educational paper. It didn't work, but still, I still remember that was something where I said, okay, I can somehow contribute to something that smells a little bit of research. So
very nice.
So that's the first story that I can
charming,
tell.
Really charming.
That was
story.
Before I started studying
at
nice. University.
Very nice. Then let's get to your mathematical training. Tell us about your mathematical education, starting with the Max Planck Gymnasium in Trier.
Yes.
And until you got your PhD in mathematics at Georg Wilhelm University in Göttingen.
Okay, and so that's a range of years.
Yes.
So I went to what's called Max Planck Gymnasium in Trier. I always say when people say, what is Trier? Well, it's the city where Karl Marx was born, apart from myself and many other people, of course. And Max Planck Gymnasium, you can a little bit guess it from the name, was the high school where mathematics and natural sciences had a certain level, so to speak. Other high schools were either old languages, Latin and Greek were the high points, or new languages like French, which was important in Trier, which is close to the borders. So, I went to that high school, and in particular during the last 2 or 3 years you were able to specialize a little bit in this mathematical physical direction. Mm-hmm. And that of course gave me sort of a head start when starting at university. And when I started at university, that was in fact in Saarbrücken, and the University of the Saarland. At that time, by now Trier has its own university, but at that time, well, it was just starting, but you couldn't study mathematics when I started. So the closest university was Saarbrücken. And I started, in fact, quite young. I was only 17 years when I started at the university. And in the beginning, of course, you had the typical curriculum, linear algebra and analysis. And at first, I felt more at home in linear algebra because, to start with, I had rather an algebraic mind, I would say. But then the analysis course, there were 3 semesters, consecutive semesters. They were given by a young professor at that time, Tammo Tomdik. In fact, he was a student of the quite famous topologist Dieter Puppe, who was in Heidelberg. But he just had gotten a professorship in Saarbrücken, and I mean, he did a very good job teaching us, calculus from analysis from the very first steps and going up to vector analysis and relatively complicated stuff in the 3rd semester. And it was both his personality, but also the group of young assistants surrounding him, his team, so to speak, that somehow attracted me. And I think it was more the personalities of these people rather than the subject itself that really was the most important thing. But in retrospect, I'm also happy because, so as a follow-up, there were courses in particular differential topology, which was developing quickly at the time, so we got close to the results of Cavert and Milner, one of our interview partners, at the very end. And I mean, I felt always, both challenged by it. After the first 3 semesters, we were at a level where we could read papers that had been written maybe 5-10 years ago, to a certain degree at least, well guided. Yeah. And there were also interesting seminars where we were challenged to give small talks by ourselves about things in the literature. Yeah. And also I have maybe to add that I got a grant from something that's called Studienstiftung des Deutschen Volkes. So a grant institution for talented university students. And some money followed with it, that was nice. But also we got the opportunity to follow summer academies during the summer vacations at some nice places in the Alps usually. And that was also, both challenging. You got to know other students who were at a relatively high level and also interesting subjects to follow. So all that brought me up to a certain level. Mm-hmm. And then at some time I asked for a topic for a master's thesis and got it by Tom Dieck. And it took some time to get the right mindset. That was no longer differential topology, it was algebraic topology, which in fact I never had a course about, but somehow during seminars and so on I got a feeling about it. And then I finished this master thesis within, I don't know, something between half a year and a year. But then something also happened, namely this professor Tom Dieck, he moved to Göttingen, and as a consequence, even before I have this master degree from Saarbrücken, but in fact I was already in Göttingen when I took the final exams there. Yeah. So more or less, me and also a group of other students, we followed our professor and the assistants who went over to Göttingen. And the two places are quite different. Göttingen is a place with a lot of tradition.
Fantastic tradition.
You can still walk to the observatory where Gauss had his home and worked. And when you enter the Department of Mathematics, there is the Hilbert space. And of course, you can see the offices where Hilbert had his office and so on. This department was built with means coming from the Rockefeller Foundation after the First World War. Together with the physicists, they all together.
And it was not destroyed during the Second World War?
Göttingen was almost intact, and I think there is a story that this is thanks to some major in the British Air Force who had some affinities to Göttingen. So, it hadn't any military importance either. Although that hasn't helped other cities, but Göttingen was, of course, something happened, but not heavily destroyed.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
So it was almost as in the old days, and you could walk everywhere by foot. It's a relatively small city.
Yeah.
But I mean, Saarbrücken was a very new university with new auditoria, modern, at least for that time, modern equipment. Göttingen was, in that respect, it was old-fashioned.
Yeah, I see.
And I had to get used to it.
How many students approximately were there at Göttingen at your time?
At the I mean, you mean at the university in
yeah.
total?
Yeah, approximately.
I mean, Göttingen is a relatively small town with a bit more than 100,000 inhabitants. In that time, I think it was around 20,000 students. So the students really were dominating population.
I understand.
And also in mathematics, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but there were several hundred students of mathematics and physics, which was close by.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But from what you're telling, it would seem to be natural that Don Dick would be your PhD advisor.
Yes, and it also started a little bit like that. But then several things happened. The most important in that instance was that Larry Smith, who was then actually my PhD advisor, he arrived as a new professor, new young professor. And a new professor gets a number of assistants. I think we were 2 or 3. And while still working at the first bits and pieces of my PhD thesis, so I was taken over, so to speak, by Larry Smith and was his assistant for a range of years. And then it was then also quite natural to say, okay, since you have to work with this professor, he should then also be your advisor. And also the topic changed a little bit. I mean, I had to, I think it's quite common when you work on a PhD thesis, it's somehow a little bit of terra incognita, and at first you think, I mean, this might work, and then it doesn't, and you try something else. And so the topic also, it was not completely different, but it shifted a little bit.
I see.
Yeah.
So you said earlier that you started being interested more in algebra, and then now you switched to algebraic topology. And
I mean, topology is somehow, in my view, at least the way I saw it, it's an ideal combination of several subjects. You can't do very interesting topology without knowing some algebra, without knowing some analysis, without knowing some geometry.
Right.
And geometry, in fact, in the beginning, I didn't think I was very good at geometrical thinking at all. I've always been very bad at making at least live drawings. I've taught myself to do drawings for mathematics, but apart from that,
I see.
I have no talent there at all.
Okay.
But also when I've been teaching the subject of differential geometry, very low level, many times, I always try to advertise to the students that, well, instead of going step by step, as you might do, at least in the beginning in analysis or in algebra or whatever, where you build one step, here you steal something from this area and steal something from the others, and the whole thing lives by putting things together.
Yes.
And that has fascinated me, I must say. And that's something that that in the end also made me like this subject more than others.
That's a nice description. So let's talk a little more about your research after your PhD.
Mm-hmm.
So much of your recent research work has been about the interplay between what is called directed homotopy in algebraic topology and concurrency, a notion appearing in theoretical computer science.
Right.
Could you please explain this?
Maybe I start with saying, I mean, after the PhD, of course, at some time I had to leave Göttingen, and then through, I got to know my wife, my Danish wife, while being for a year in Paris. So I moved to Denmark, and after a short interplay at first the Technical University in Lyngby, and then in Aarhus, where I also met Ib Madsen, who was also a very impressive figure in topology. It still is at his high age. Then I got a position at this university, Aalborg University. At the time, I was the only topologist. By now, I have at least one very nice woman colleague, Lisbeth Feistrup, who is, in parenthesis, a student of Ib Madsen. And well, when you are a little bit on your own, I still went to seminars in Aarhus from time to time, but I felt lonely at the end. Doing a little bit of research in equivariant algebraic topology. I didn't have so much time for research either. So at a certain time, I began, and also in discussions with colleagues here, to think about maybe you should find something else to get interested in. And then an opportunity arose. I would call it a wild card in the sports metaphor. There was a conference at the Newton Institute in Cambridge called New Connections Between Mathematics and Computer Science. And well, I applied and had the opportunity to come, and I found it very interesting. I mean, there were many different aspects of that, and most of them I've forgotten in the meanwhile. But there were two talks that really, thrilled me from the very beginning. One, making connections between what's called distributed computing and topology, and the other one between concurrency and topology. And they are very much related also in between each other. But I went into this concurrency discipline after a while. And to set the scene, what is this all about? Well, it becomes interesting when you don't have just one program running on one processor, but when things get distributed. And of course, that's more and more the case. You want to do a calculation or run through an algorithm, and you distribute it either just on your laptop, but maybe also on the whole World Wide Web. We see that more and more. And you have units that somehow collaborate for the solution. But in the extreme case, there is no coordination, or a very small amount of coordination. And that means when you want to rely on a result of such a common effort with very little coordination, you have to have algorithms that are robust in the sense that it doesn't play too much of a role who of the parts does run through his or program, his or her, I don't know, program quickly, and another one who is slowed down for whatever reason. But in a realistic scenario, you have to think about, I mean, you don't know, everything can happen. Yeah. And now to make it easy, let's think that each of the processors follows just a linear code.
Okay.
So linear code for processor number 1, linear code for processor number 2, linear code for processor number 3. And I show it like that because you can then think about it where the compound process will be something that you can see as a path in higher dimensional space. In that case, with the 3 processors in 3-dimensional space.
Okay. Okay.
That's not so. That's something you are used to look at as a topologist. But it wouldn't be interesting at all if there would not be this constraint with communication. But the constraint with communication can mean that, well, all processes at some time need to, say, write down partial results or so on a common piece of memory. Or they have to need access to something that is there only once. And only one or maybe only 2 can do that at the same time. And when you think a little bit about that, that means you punch some holes into the space, the compound state space. Okay. So now topology starts. And directed topology starts with, well, usually when you run through a program, maybe you can have some loops, but still the program as such is directed. So you can't just go back and forth.
Okay. Okay.
But when you look at geometric space somehow, there is no orientation in it.
Yeah.
It's very important that you have this spatial symmetry always. You can back and forth, both in, at least in space, maybe not in time. But now this time really plays an important role, like in relativity theory, by the way.
Okay.
And so, I mean, what we try to integrate with a small group is somehow, on the one hand, we would like still to use all the tools from, well, many of the tools from ordinary algebraic topology on the one side. On the other hand, you have to take into account that all these paths somehow cannot go back and forth. There is a built-in direction in the whole setting. And somehow to reconcile these two things has been a challenge since then, I think.
Yeah, okay.
And in the first place, of course, I mean, you don't have a theory that does that. You try to build that. I should also say, I mean, the important notion, you mentioned it yourself, is that of homotopy. Homotopy means, at least in the simplest case, that you take a one-parameter deformation between either spaces, or in the simplest case that we looked at was between paths. But now also for the homotopy discussion, it's important that all the paths on the way during the one-parameter deformation, they stay directed. You are not allowed, even if you have paths in the beginning and in the end that are directed, you can sometimes build homotopies between the way, on the way, have the option to go back and forth. But you have to find somehow a way to describe that that's not allowed, and to build it into a machinery that in the end still allows your calculations.
Okay.
I mean, that's the challenge. I mean, to describe it just in words that I'm doing now, that's the easy task. The difficult task is somehow to use some of the machinery and adapt it in such a way that you in the end also can say, okay, I mean, there are so and so many essentially different ways to get from A to B.
I see. Are people in theoretical computer science, have they found interest in this type?
Some.
Some.
So there are competing ways of thinking about that, and certainly the most mainly used one is the technique with whole conferences on it called Petri nets. And I have to admit right away, I mean, that's nothing that I'm an expert in. I only know the ABC and not much more. And this is an industry in itself. They have conferences and theories going on. We are trying somehow to push that. I mean, we can, along the way, we can do things in a different way and achieve the same results. There's even a theoretical result by a collaborator, a Dutch collaborator who resides in Australia, Robert van Glabeck, who somehow has theoretical reasons to show that this way of looking at things can do everything that competing theories could do. So in that sense, we are quite good, but we are, I mean, we are a small niche compared to the large community, to other large communities.
Sounds very exciting. Now we are going to switch topic entirely, because, well, as you mentioned yourself, you wound up at as associate professor at Aalborg University, and you've been heavily involved with teaching.
Yes.
And you worked as a supervisor for many students in a wide variety of mathematical topics. You also became the Teacher of the Year in 2018 and 2019. Besides, you have been involved with public outreach, having given public lectures on several aspects of mathematics. Raising public awareness of mathematics is not a mere slogan for you. You have taken it very seriously. And as one of the editor-in-chief actually from 2002 to 2003 of Mathilde, newsletter of the Danish Math Society, you published interviews with various mathematicians, which made you eminently prepared to take the initiative for the interviews of the Abel Prize laureates. Could you tell about how the interview with the Abel Prize laureates came about, please?
Yes, that's a little bit funny story, I would say. So, as you told, I had a little bit of experience as one of the editors of Mathilde. So Mathilde was the journal of the Danish Mathematical Society. It was founded while Bodil Branner was in fact the chairman of the Danish Mathematical Society, which is, by the way, as you mentioned, is celebrating 150 years of its existence. And one of her initiatives was to say we need also to have sort of a regular newsletter. And in fact, I was one of in the team of the newsletter editors there, and my specialty was to try to interview some of the grand old men in Danish mathematics. So I had Abel Prize and Bent Fugle from Copenhagen, and then at the end also Ib Madsen from. That was a special pleasure to interview him. So I had a little bit of experience. I don't know, it was maybe 4 or 5 interviews that appeared in Mathilde. By the way, I found the name of Mathilde. I mean, the joke was it was math with a tilde on it. This was the reason why it was called Mathilde.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, then we heard about this new initiative with the Abel Prize, but in fact, Mathilde was contacted by somebody in the Norwegian embassy in Denmark. Uh-huh. I can't remember any names by now, but somehow it came to there came a mail invitation. Would we be interested to cover the Abel Prize? And then we discussed it a little bit. At that time, Michael Rørdam was the editor-in-chief of Mathilde. And I mean, taking all my courage together, I suggested, could you try to get an interview with the first Abel Prize recipient, Professor Jean-Pierre Serre? And then, well, we wrote in the first place.
This was in 2003.
The interview was in 2003, and probably also the initiative was in 2003, or maybe late 2002. I can't remember that.
Okay.
So we wrote to to this contact at the Norwegian embassy in the first place, and then this person talked to people in the Abel committee. And then, yes, we were granted this option, and Professor Serre was informed about that. And then somehow Christian Seib, your colleague Christian Seib, learned about that.
He was the head of the Norwegian Math Society.
At the time, yeah. Yes. And then he thought, well, that's a pity that it all goes to Denmark. And tried to ask. I don't know if he asked you first or whether this and the other.
I think he asked me first.
He asked you first. Okay, yeah. Whether you would be ready to do something similar, and then we were asked how we could cope with the situation, and that's the first instance where we two made connections.
That's right.
With each other, at least directly. Yeah. I had been in Trondheim before at a previous Norwegian Nordic Congress, but I don't think we met at that time.
No,
that was
the first time you went to this Nordic Congress.
That's right. That's right.
In 1988. Actually.
That's completely right. Yeah. So the two of us were put into contact, and I took it with a sort of relief. Then it meant I wouldn't have to be completely on my own. And it soon turned out that let's say it again in the sports metaphor, we got to be a dream team, isn't that right, Christian? In the sense, we have different ways of looking at such an institute, but somehow it was very good to have to have two pairs of eyes looking at such a challenge and finding out what would be a good question to ask and so on.
I would also add to that you taught me so much about the technique of interviewing, so I learned a lot from you.
Thanks.
So that's certainly true. Yes.
Yeah, but you came also with a lot of good, like now, you came up with a lot of good questions, and in the end we found out our own way to do that.
Yeah.
I still remember we were quite nervous when it came to Jean-Pierre Serre. And I remember also in the beginning of the first interview, he was somehow, I wouldn't say hostile, but he was not. It didn't look like he was.
He was in no good mood.
He was not in a very good mood, and understand that to a certain degree, because I mean, these Abel Prize recipients, they are usually elderly people already, and during this week they have so many things to do, and then. Still an hour of an interview, and probably he thought, I mean, these are some of these silly journalists who are asking me silly questions and so on.
That's right, but yeah, I have to tell you, the really breakthrough with Serre changed entirely and became very positive and friendly and everything was when you told him or said that you were aware that how he discovered some very important notion of having something to do with fiber bundles. Then he lighted up immediately. Oh, you knew about that, and that changed the atmosphere.
That changed the game, yeah. So in the end, I think I reread it this morning. In fact, this interview. Okay. I think it went quite well.
It went actually quite well. Yeah. That's right, and of course we should not. Underestimate the importance of that initiative of yours, getting started with the Abel interviews, because of course we went on and had interviews for the next 14 years or so.
That's right.
And then of course after you dropped out and I continued, we still are doing that, and it's been actually, I would say, unabashedly and very, very important and successful thing. And now it's published both in the European Math Society newsletter, now magazine, and also in AMS notices. Yes. And of course we published, or the European Math Society Publishing House published a book with the interviews we had.
Right, so that's right.
Right. So it's been, and it's, I'm saying that straight ahead. Hadn't it been for you, there wouldn't have been these Abel interviews, and it's been very important for.
I guess then somebody else would have done it.
Right, for the prize itself and so on.
Well, I'm also quite happy with it, and I mean, in the long run, when you look back at a relatively long life, maybe that's the most important thing I've been dealing with.
It's certainly for the Abel Prize, I think, to make it known for the math community. These interviews has been very important. I really just say that. Could I ask you, and this is a very difficult question, but anyway, do you remember or do you have any sort of special highlights that you would mention from all these interviews? I
mean, maybe I have two different, and on a completely different level, answers to your question. The first one has to do with the amount of the Abel Prize. I mean, in most cases, we didn't really dare to ask what people really would do with the prize money. Right. Because, I mean, that's quite personal. Yeah. But I remember, and I don't know why
and by the way, the prize money was almost $1 million at the time.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah, and it's by now the Norwegian krone.
The krone is, but still, it's
a substantial amount. I don't think it has been published in the interview, also because it was maybe a little bit too personal. But somehow I think we dared to ask Professor Serre about it. And his answer was just laconic. Well, I'll see to have it spent. Another occasion that I remember vividly, that was when we interviewed Pierre Deligne, 10 years after that, I guess. And he had made it already quite public and said it also in the beginning of the interview, that this was not money for him, but it was money for mathematics itself. And so he wanted to give it to various institutions that had to play big role in his own career, which I remember there was the IHS, of course, the institute in Bureau-sur-Vette in Paris, and also the Institute of Advanced Studies in Princeton, but also had in high esteem several institutions in Russia, one small high school for economical subjects with a very good mathematical program, and also a foundation. I've forgotten the name. But he made it very clear. I mean, I think he was one of the most modest interview partners we had. He didn't want the money for himself, but he wanted it for several mathematical purposes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that is one of the highlights. I don't want to get into the mathematical subjects. That would take
that's right.
too much time, and I wouldn't remember many of the things either.
Yeah.
But one of the questions I think we ask probably every time, or almost every time, was a little bit of what we already talked about with Professor Serre, whether people had certain sudden flashes of insight that brought new directions, new results to them. And this is a little bit, I think it comes because we know about this story published in a book by Adama about Poincaré stepping up in a bus somewhere at the coast in Normandy, I think it was, and also in a flash of insight saw connections between modular forms, Fuchsian functions, and so on, and formalisms in non-Euclidean geometry on the other side. And that is quite well described, and is somehow one of the iconic stories about how things sometimes come up where the underconscious works for you somehow.
Yes.
And I have always been a little bit interested in and how is it that people come to new concepts, new ideas, and so on. And as I said, we asked almost everybody. And with Serre, this moment came. He told us about when he started on investigating homotopic groups of spheres and so on. One of the techniques that's very important is that you bring in what's called the path vibration. And the path vibration brings in connections between the space you're looking at and its loop space and so on. And I mean, you can explain it to a student nowadays within 10 minutes. Yeah. But if you don't have it, there is no technique available. There were intricate techniques available at the time, mainly developed by Leray, spectral sequences and so on, that Serre know all about. But there was a missing link. And this missing link, that's the story he told us, occurred to him when returning from vacations in the night train.
That's right.
And he got very excited about it, although it was just an idea. It was not full-fledged at the time, of course. Right. But he awoke his wife.
That's right.
And told her about it.
He told us. That's
yes.
Right. That's right.
And similar stories, I mean, I remember that late John Tate also told us about, well, something appeared to him, I can't remember what subject it was, while he was in a library preparing for a talk to give right afterwards. And I mean, there also something came up in his mind. But I think everybody also told us, well, it happened once or twice or three times maybe in a lifetime, but all too rarely.
And too rare, that's right.
And the other thing that's I think is at least as important to add, it doesn't come for free. It does come after a long time of efforts, of trying to put things together and so on. It's only when you have made these efforts and have to maybe run against the wall and emotions come into the picture that your underconsciousness somehow does part of the work for you.
Yes, yes.
And I remember very well one word that I will never forget about it. We will discuss it with late Professor Nierenberg. Yeah. And he coined the word, which comes from my native Germany, it needs Sitzfleisch to get to something serious in the end.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a story, a very good story that I
right.
like to tell.
Exactly. One thing that reminds me every time we talk about these sudden flashes of insight, there is this Abel, when he visited Berlin in 1826. He stayed with some Norwegian friends well, they shared a large apartment. But one of these friends of Abel said that usually every night, or very, very often, Abel would wake up in the middle of the night, light a candle, and write down some ideas he woke up with in mathematics. So apparently Abel had maybe several flashes from that story. Anyway,
I would have liked if it had happened more to me also.
Yeah, right. Oh, to me also. Sure. Yes, as we just talked about, you have been a spokesperson for raising awareness of mathematics, also for people with little mathematical knowledge. So this is a many-fledged question, but let's start with, why is this an important endeavor?
First, I would say you are exaggerating a little bit. I mean, my main relation was that for several years when I was with the executive committee of the European Math Society, I was the liaison person for the committee raising public awareness in mathematics. First headed by Vagn Lundsgaard Hansen from the Technical University, and then later by Erhard Bierhans from Berlin. So these are people who are really doing work on the street. Going to a conference and so on, and using several days, having some street theater going on, challenging people with mathematical puzzles and so on. I'm afraid I have to say I've never been so close to it myself, but I think it's worthwhile, and I'm happy that people do that. I'm also still quite impressed with all the initiatives that are connected to the Abel Prize and going on in Norway in connection with the prize, where both young and also staff are really very active in promoting mathematics at the school. But generally speaking, promoting mathematics is, in a sense, it's more difficult than for many other subjects, for various reasons. One reason is that, mathematics is a school subject that you have from the degree 1. And that means that many people think they know what mathematics is. And depending on what level they have reached, they think, it's something to do with big numbers. Or it's something that has to do with computing different Riemann integrals or something like that. And not many people are aware of that mathematics has so many other facets. And it's, first of all, it's a subject of great interest. And on the other hand, it has more and more importance in everyday life, in industry, and so on. So there, for example, the physicists or the computer science have a big advantage. First of all, there's much less teaching of it at school. So people are still somehow interested in, and it's easier for them to come up with pictures. I mean, cosmology or so. That's something, I don't understand it. And I think many laymen understand it even less, but you're somehow thrilled by the idea. There's something out there that you can watch and, and so on. Saying, coding theory is interesting, or topological data analysis is interesting for this and that reason. It's much more difficult to make this connection somehow.
I think that's a very important point you made there.
And every initiative in this direction is welcome. And my own contribution has been much more internal into mathematics. Telling mathematicians is, we are an important subject, so look at it. We have these our heroes here, and we interviewed them. Or I try it in being a moderately good teacher. And as a teacher, I try to not only to convey the techniques that are interesting, but also to tell stories and to make a storyline out of it. Why is it that we are studying it? Why is this result a small petty lemma, and why is that one really? Why is theorema egregium really egregium, for example?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, it's really depressing that so many people have no qualms about saying they are illiterate in mathematics, or they even hate mathematics. I mean, and a concrete example, which I think is really depressing, we have this newspaper in Norway, the largest Aftenposten, which is supposed to be a cultural paper as well. They hardly mention the Abel Prize at all. You know, it's a few articles that has been written over the years, but they just neglect it without any feeling of shame. I mean, it's just very depressing. Yeah,
on the local scene, I can say it's also quite difficult to get the Nordic Congress published anywhere.
I see. Yes, right. I have to, on this occasion, I have to read, which is really a sad thing, but on the other hand, he probably tells the truth. And this is Sylov, which was a brilliant Norwegian mathematician, and he worked together with Sophus Lie to publish Abel's collected works, you know, also. But on Sophus Lie's death, he had a eulogy about and part of that eulogy says the following, and this is Sylov's. Complained on the occasion of Lie's death. It is the mathematician's misfortune more than the other scientists that his work cannot be presented or interpreted for the educated general public, even for the educated general public. In fact, hardly for a collection of scientists from other fields. One has to be a mathematician to appreciate the beauty of a proof of a major theorem, or to admire the edifice erected by mathematicians over thousands of years. Do you agree with that assessment?
I mean, it's certainly true that it is quite difficult to see that something is beautiful. You have to have a certain background knowledge. That's also true for music. It's also true for painting. But there it's a bit easier. To get emotionally involved. Yes. And this emotional involvement, I mean, both in teaching but also in trying to convey our subject, that's difficult. Yeah. And only, I mean, it's a long-term effort, and it cannot be done by individual people. It's the community that is challenged here.
It's sort of interesting that you mentioned this with music, because John Tate, who is one of the Abel Prize winners that we interviewed, he said the following on this subject. He said that math is both, art and also science, and there are some artistic aspect to mathematics. It's just beautiful. Unfortunately, it's only beautiful to the initiated, to the people who do it. It can't really be understood or appreciated much on a popular level, the way music can. You don't have to be a composer to enjoy music, but in mathematics, you do have to be a mathematician to appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a challenge. And we don't have these beautiful pictures of the galaxies that the astronomers have and so on, that somehow get you into a feeling of awe.
Right, exactly. But another Abel Prize recipient, Lovage, he mentioned, this was not only mathematics, but he mentioned the danger that science in general is under pressure. And he thinks about it, things are so complicated, so it's easier now, to distinguish between science and pseudoscience, and that we, even as mathematicians, has a responsibility for educating, if you like, the public to be more aware of this danger. So it has some wide applications.
And that is, of course, already a challenge at school. Yes. To do that, at least to raise awareness for the problem is there.
Yeah, and Lovage mentioned that even in high school we don't teach it right. That's his conclusion. He talks from experience from Hungary, but that we have to guard against these pseudoscience things that is so easily false, speculation and so on. Yeah.
But maybe I want to add another direction that is a little bit more positive. I mean, mathematics for centuries, until quite recently, was a subject that didn't have too many repercussions into, say, industry, into real life, so to speak. It was mainly something that, I'm exaggerating now, but Euler, of course, he had fountains and whatever, and so on. So also in earlier times, there were applications around. But the applicability of mathematics has exploded while the two of us have lived and have gone into subjects that are not just classical engineering and so on, and not just physics and so on. Mathematics, and some people say mathematics is everywhere, but the problem is, apart from mathematicians, people are not aware of that situation. And mathematics is in fact is now an economic pillar of the society. It's underpinning so much of industry. Just think about, mathematics together, of course, with engineering and computer science, they go hand in hand. But the production of most consumer goods, say cars or so on, but nowadays it would be impossible without the input of mathematics. All our communication means, credit cards and so on, without the interception of mathematics. In fact, starting with pure number theory in the very beginning that had been so remote from many applications, it is everywhere around. So it's an important factor. But unfortunately, we mathematicians have not been very good at conveying the importance of mathematics.
Just think about your credit card. This what is behind keeping it safe, is deep mathematical theory.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. You have to
elliptic curves and so on. So
exactly right. You have to tell me about this citation from René Thom that you told me. I think that's so funny.
Yeah, I told you earlier in the interview that I passed a year in Paris while being a PhD student. And I went several times to Bure-sur-Yvette, to the IHES. And at that time, Thom was still there. I think he was already an emeritus professor. At that time, he was a half-god for me because, he had invented so much in algebraic topology. Catastrophe theory was very hot at the time. It's no longer. But at that time, he had already a thorough interest in the history of mathematics. And I think it was on Saturdays that he ran a seminar on the history of mathematics when the institute otherwise was relatively calm. And I went there for several occasions, and I can't remember the exact circumstances. But we're talking about mathematics through all the ages. And then the quote is the following. Not directly, but in my own words, it is, well, people have told me that half of the mathematicians, or maybe even more than half of the mathematicians through all times, are still around, are still living. But it was certainly not the better half.
I like that. I would like to read you again a quotation, and this from Harishchandra, and hear your comments on it. I have often pondered over the roles of knowledge or experience on the one hand and imagination or intuition on the other in the process of discovery. I believe that there is a certain fundamental conflict between the two, and knowledge, by advocating caution, tends to inhibit the flight of imagination. Therefore, a certain naivete, unburdened by conventional wisdom, can sometimes be a positive asset.
Well, I wouldn't commend it from my own perspective, but when I look back at the Abel interviews, it was quite apparent that the most stunning results were very often obtained by the recipients when they were still quite young, around the age of 30 or so.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it looks like Harishchandra is right. And I think we also had this comment from several of the people that maybe they know more about the literature, they know more about the pitfalls that you can get into. But it needs also a certain, well, as I said, naivete, but also a sort of brute force to get into areas and to think, maybe I can do something where nobody else has tried it really before. Yes. When you get at a higher age, when these people get at a higher age, of course they were still enormously talented and versatile mathematicians, but they would usually somehow build on previous experiences and contacts with other people and advance the subject and giving, ideas to others. But this option of, and also courage to start on new undeveloped areas and go into it with all your brute force and not being held back that, maybe that is impossible.
Right.
That I think would be my comment in that direction.
Yeah. And of course, even with the Harishchandra thing, you need sitzfleisch.
Of course. Without you will never.
You cannot give up. You have to really struggle. Right?
Yes.
And of course, this brings us again to this mathematics is a young man's game, as Hardy said. And you just explained it very eloquently. Of course, you have stronger, more, I don't know how to describe, you're more energy, whatever, when you're younger. The older, of course, you build on what you sort of maybe discovered earlier and so on. But experience, of course, comes in a very important way.
Yeah.
If you should venture a guess, which mathematical areas do you think are going to witness the most important developments in the coming years? This is a hard question.
Well, that's probably a question for people from the Champions League and not to me.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yes. Let me give you a clue. Could it be that the interplay, the computers, using computers will have some effect or be important?
Well, they have already a certain effect. It started back with the solution of the four-color problem back in the 80s, I think. And it happens more and more often that results are in the first place checked computer-aidedly. But there are new developments now. First of all, you have these proof checkers around, and one of the results, several years ago already, the Fate-Thompson theorem about groups of odd order somehow. It was checked. It's a 250 pages paper, I think. It was completely checked by computers. Right now, I know I've heard by hearsay that the new discipline of condensed mathematics featured by people like Peter Scholze also needed an important step that then in fact was checked by appropriate software. And I think this is still an area that's very much under development, and I'm not so afraid of that these computers in the end will make their own mathematics remote from what people really do. You never know what will happen in 50 or 100 years. Yeah. But I could imagine at least that you much more than now would use algorithms to get into, to get help from the computer. First of all, you can already now ask about results. Does there exist anything in that and that direction? And then the whole literature will be searched, and if you ask intelligently enough, then you will find either an answer you or don't know or so. But I would imagine that more and more you can come in sort of a dialogue which uses the two forces, the human imagination on the one side, on the other hand, the enormous options that computer algorithms have to search through. Everything, I would say, and do it already quite quickly. And I don't see an end to the story. When I was young, it was completely infeasible to think that a computer might be better in check or Go than a human being. But now they are, in fact. And
right. In chess also, right. Yes. Yeah, it's sort of depressing in one way.
Yeah, you can see it that way. On the other hand, maybe it opens venues and options that you otherwise couldn't see.
That is certainly true. Yes, that's certainly true. I liked when we interviewed Peter Lax, who also is one of the Abel recipients, and he said that, of course, talking about computers, how fast they are and so on, but he said that half the speed or what makes it is due to clever algorithms.
That's
and he also
true,
said that, but to get clever algorithm, you need mathematicians.
Yes,
so
and of course the work developing these algorithms for computer-aided mathematics, so to speak, it demands mathematicians at a high level also.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Yes, I also, again, as a quotation, and this from Felix Klein, which I would like to hear your comment on. He said that mathematics develops as old results are being understood and illuminated by new methods and insights. Proportionally, with a better and deeper understanding, new problems naturally arise.
Yeah, and I think we also asked some of the Abel Prize recipients about that. One could be a little bit afraid of that. At a certain time, everything that is worth of developing in mathematics, it has already been developed. And so, what should we? What could a young person find now? But I think it was Sarah who said, "Don't worry about that. These problems do arise all the time."
Yeah.
And I think when you look at, just during our lifetimes, so many new subjects in mathematics that almost didn't exist when we started, they are now flourishing, and others that were very much talk of the day, they still exist, but not the same importance. And I think it's particularly young people who can somehow smell where it is that new things happen, and then they dive into these new directions and give them also a push.
Yeah. I know also that we ask these Abel recipients, very often we ask them, and they all agree completely, namely Hilbert said, of course, that problems are the lifeblood of mathematics.
Yeah.
No question about that.
Yes, but I also imagine, I remember that we got various answers on the question whether people looked at themselves first of all as theory developers or as problem solvers.
Yes.
And I think it's this mix of people. You have it first of all in one person, but in a community it is very important that both types of mathematical thinkers somehow exist, and they can live luckily together as well.
Yes, you sort of gave me the clue immediately to another quotation, namely by Freeman Dyson. I think he describes this the theory builder and the problem solver very well. Some mathematicians are birds, others are frogs. Birds fly high in the air and survey broad vistas of mathematics out to the horizon. They delight in concepts that unify our thinking and bring together diverse problems from different parts of the landscape. Frogs lie in the mud below and see only the flowers that grow nearby. They delight in the details of a particular object, and they solve problems one at a time. I think that's a very nice description of it.
I think it's almost impossible to say it in a better way.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you.
But it's important that the frogs and the birds coexist.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, I'm sure you will agree with this, but I think it's I think that was what Andrew Wiles told us in the interview. The definition of a good mathematical problem is the mathematics it generates rather than the problem itself.
Yeah.
I think that's well said.
That's well said, and I mean there are many instances where you can show that that's really the truth. I mean a single theorem as such in itself, in the end, I mean take the Fermat problem in itself. I mean now you know it's true, but well,
sure,
that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
But the whole build up leading to the final solution, I mean that's something that is under current development still, and very, very important.
Yeah,
leading to new insights.
And to find or raise problems that have this effect requires a lot of, well, what Fermat was thinking, you know, probably out of curiosity, he could probably not have realized how important that mathematics that would be needed. So yes,
you don't know it before you start on the endeavor.
Yeah. And of course, let me again, which we also mentioned, I think, in the interview with Attia and Singer, namely Eugene Wigner's saying that the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the physical sciences. Mm-hmm. And Galileo's dictum, I also love that, the laws of nature are written in the language of mathematics.
Yeah. So now we are raising public awareness.
Exactly.
During the interview, right?
Right. Okay, now we come to the end of this interview, and I want first to ask you the following. You were, as you probably said, you said it actually earlier, headhunted to a newsletter of the EMS, where you were editor-in-chief from 2003 to 2008. And in 2009, you were voted into the EMS Executive Committee, where you have been from 2009 to 2016. The last 6 years as vice president. You were liaison for the EMS committee, raising public awareness. We mentioned that earlier. And you were the person in charge of the EMS web profile. All these are heavy and time-consuming duties. How would you describe these assignments yourself? And of course, you were still teaching. You didn't get much credit from your teaching load here.
No, unfortunately not. No.
But could you comment on this period of your life with the EMS?
Well, it was both a challenging period. It did consume quite a lot of my time, which then was stolen from research, I must admit.
Yes.
And from my family, which I also have to admit. Yeah. On the other hand, it was also, I mean, in a sense, I liked these duties as well. They also gave me something back, and when I left the EMS in the executive board, it was really I missed it for a while. It had been sort of a family, a second family for me as well, because you see, people who go into these jobs at the EMS. These are people who are highly devoted, and at least most of them, when they really say, "Okay, I'll take over," that they do. It's not like in real life when people say, "Okay, well maybe I can do something like that," and then after 3 months you ask again and nothing has happened. That wouldn't be the case there. Mm-hmm. So we were really pulling on the same string. And I mean, the EMS is still a relatively new society. It was founded in 1990, so in comparison with the Norwegian or the Danish, it's a small society. And I'm still not too happy that by now I think we are a bit more than 3,000 personal members. There should be many more, I think.
Yes.
And we have not, I mean, it has risen from I started from 2,000 to 3,000, but it's still not, absolutely not living up to its potential. I'm a little bit, I'm not happy about that fact. And of course, when it comes to the daily work, it's really many-faceted. A lot of things are small discussions and decisions that have to be made. How is the money? I mean, it's not a lot of money, but the EMS has some money and can give something to organization of conferences, workshops, and so on. How are you going to find out who is worth giving the money or not? That takes time. But maybe more importantly, in fact, I mean, getting into contact with some of the politicians, speaking the word of mathematics towards Brussels, towards the people who really can give some money. That's a tough challenge. I've not really been very involved in that. That was more the challenge of the presidents of the EMS. They have done a tremendous work in doing that with some success, but of course you could always hope for much more. But I think it's really important that we have such a transnational mathematical society. Many things can be done, the near things can be done much better by the National Mathematical Society, but it's also important to have a player on the transnational scene and somehow also a competitor to the American Mathematical Society. I don't want to say anything negative about the American Mathematical Society, but it's such a dominating society, mainly in good. But on the other hand, if you wouldn't have anything that somehow can, has the same sort of goals, and they would take everything. There is the possibility that the energy is taken out of the Europeans, so to speak.
I understand.
And concrete instance is MathSanet, a nice toy, but it's very important that we also have Centralblatt.
Yes.
Because otherwise, I mean, there would be only one venue, and you know when there is no competition.
Yes. How many members are there in the AMS, American Math Society? Do you have any idea compared to the 2,000 members in the AMS? Okay, we have to look it up, but if I should venture a guess, I would say 30,000 or 40,000 or something in that way. Numbers count.
Yeah. And of course, I'm also a member of the AMS, and most Europeans, European mathematicians are.
Yeah.
But too few are members of the EMS.
Yes, I observed that at the math department. I was in Trondheim. It was disappointingly few that were members. Yeah.
So maybe some of the people who are watching these interviews get the idea
let's hope so.
It's cheap. So
right. Okay, so we end this interview with what you also suggested that we have done with all the Abel interviews. What interest and hobbies do you have outside of mathematics?
There, I think I'm a little bit disappointing. And of course, I'm thinking about it quite a lot because I'm going to retire. And that means that mathematics will play a minor role in my life in the future, and so hobbies have to take over. On the one hand, saying it in a negative, I would say I couldn't single out a specific hobby where I would say, now I know I will do exactly that. Saying it in a more positive way, and that's an exaggeration. In a sort, I would say I'm a Renaissance man in the sense that I have many things that I'm interested in. So, popular science, in a sense, is interesting, and I think I will have much more time to read about what's happening in, for example, biology, which is an exploding discipline by now, genetics and so on, that has been something that has evolution and so on, that has thrilled me for some time, but only as a complete novice. Okay. I'm also quite interested in, just as a listener to different sorts of music. If it were not for this Congress, I would now go to many events at the Copenhagen Jazz Week, which is exactly this week, where it happens. I'm now living most of the time in the Copenhagen area, and then I take the opportunity once in a while also to go to classical concerts by the Radio Symphony Orchestra and so on. I like to go to not everything, but to art museums and so on. So in that sense, I'm looking avidly in the pamphlets from what's called the People's University and say, okay, you could do this and you could do that if just you had the time. Now I'll get more time to to use some of my time on new interests. Maybe I'll also try to take up a little bit of piano playing that I did as a teenager, but not really ever since.
Okay.
We'll see.
Okay. Well, thank you very much on behalf of myself and it is the Danish Math Society. Thank you for this very interesting interview. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it has been my pleasure as well, and I've been thrilled that he in fact took the effort to come here just to interview a normal mathematician like me.
That's been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.